the biggest cause of writer's block, it isn't actually writer's block. It's just that you're not writing what you're supposed to be writing, which is this scenario. Like if I'm like David, I want you to write me an essay about why Lionel Messi is better than Cristiano Ronaldo. You're just going to sit there and like Google some stuff, and you're not going to write anything.
But if you were to say, write a piece about Paul, I've been reading the book of Acts, and then also yesterday I bought a biography of Paul. And so as long as I have the permission to bring that into my own personal experience, then it can sort of roar. And that's a word that I think a lot about, like what's going to make me roar. You know, like when you're in a conversation, you're with someone at the bar and you're going around and there's not a lot of energy in the conversation. Then all of a sudden somebody says something, everyone sits up. And all of a sudden people start chirping, people are into it, they're passionate, they're saying something from their core. That's what I want to get to. But there's something beastly and almost liony about that, where it's ripping out of you and you're outside of your mind. And I feel like for me, that's when the best first drafts come, because it's like my prefrontal cortex shuts off.
This goes back to the productivity thing. Because when you're feeling like that, it doesn't matter what you've eaten or how much you've slept or any of that crap. When you're feeling that way, that I love the word beastly, like a beast. Right? It's a very, very potent word. When you feel that way, all of that stuff doesn't matter. And with that thrust, you could stay up all night writing. And I think you're almost willing to, because you know if you don't write it down now, the inspiration might leave you tomorrow.
When you're stuck, there's many ways to get unstuck. And one way to get unstuck, like I said, radical change in something physical you do. I think that's a good tactic. Music is a good way to get unstuck too. But in general, a philosophy for how to get unstuck is if you're stuck in the specifics, go general. Meaning, if you're stuck in the logistics of how something is going to happen, it's not quite adding up. What you got to do is not just keep trying to do this. You can just zoom right out. Go super general. All right, super general. What am I trying to do here? I'm trying to do this. Super general. If I had all the superpowers in the world, well, how would I do this? Right? Super general is just like, who's somebody who's done this before? Or super general. Okay, I don't know exactly what type of thing I want to write. What inspires me? Right? The way to get out of these sometimes is to go general, and so even if don't think is hard, because it's very hard to turn off the brain, but it's not so hard to redirect the brain. And so redirecting it, I think, is a useful tool. You can redirect it towards, I'm going to go rock climb, I'm going to go exercise. That'll take my brain off of it. It can also be, I'm stuck in the muck here and I need to just zoom out, and that's it. Or if I'm stuck in the general, so for example, sometimes I'm stuck in the general of like, what do I want to be in life? And what do I want to do? And who am I? And all this stuff. Specific. What's the best idea you heard in the last 2 days? If you were going to write about that, what would it be? Or what's the most interesting phone call I've had? Then you go specific because you're stuck in the general. So it's a very useful thing to do, is just to get unstuck. Know if you're stuck in the specifics, go general. If you're stuck in the general, go specific, and you'll redirect the brain.
My first piece of advice to anyone who's an aspiring writer or communicator is the key, almost 90% of it is just starting. Mm-hmm. There's a pretty intimidating moment when you flip open your laptop and you say, Chapter 1, Google. Okay, what am I going to write that hasn't been said about Google? And the key is just to start. And I think most of the magic happens in going back and editing. But just start writing, just commit to a certain amount of time, and also have deadlines. I need deadlines. I guess maybe some people don't. I work best with deadlines. But I had been thinking about writing a book for 10 years. And my dean at NYU said, if you want to be taken seriously as an academic, you either have to do peer-reviewed research. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. This is just mutual masturbation. You guys are all just writing irrelevant research to give citations to your buddies from Carnegie Mellon such that you can all get tenure. 98%, generously, it's probably 99% of it is irrelevant, other than a self-invented artificial metric for who's a quote-unquote good academic. Some of it blows up, some of it is relevant, most of it isn't. And I just read some peer-reviewed research in Journal of Market Research. This isn't for me. But he said, well, then you should probably write a book. And I had this thing stirring in me about technology, that these companies were becoming increasingly dominant, setting the trends for society, relationships. And I felt like I knew them well. But again, the key, I wish I'd done it. I wrote my first book at 52. I wish I'd started 20 years earlier. And also, I did a talk. My process is I did a talk called The Four at this conference called DLD. And I didn't know they were videoing me, but they were. They posted on YouTube, and it got 300,000 or 400,000 views. And this guy named Bob Lefsetz, who's an amazing writer who writes about the music industry, but is able to relate it to life and economics.
He's got great voice too.
Oh, fantastic. Really unique. That's it. Like bad format, no design, just literally like he's writing you an email, but he sends it out to 500,000 people. He said, "This is a great talk." And that endorsement got it a couple 100,000 views. And then this guy named Jim Levine, who ends up as one of the premier book agents, showed up in my office and said, "You should write a book on this talk." And that's been my process since. If I have an idea for a book, I'll do some newsletters on it or some shorter posts in my newsletter as a kind of a Petri dish, and I'll do a talk. And if the talk does really well on YouTube, I know I might be onto something. So I'm able to I have the minor leagues of my books, right? That's sort of my process.
I just don't bother getting bogged down in whatever you want to call it, writer's block or creative block. When I sense that I'm even starting to get stuck, like that's the thing. You can switch tracks when you see far in the distance that you're going to get stuck, right? It's often the sensation of you're slowing down. The insights or the breakthroughs are starting to slow down. You're like, oh, I'm approaching a blockage point. Right then, you can just switch to quantity. Learn something, compress a new idea, come back, and suddenly the breakthroughs come just as fast.
I personally don't believe that writer's block exists. Like I just said right now, let's all write something for 3 minutes and we'll start the clock. You could all write something. It's performance pressure that's the problem, right? It's the idea of being seen and judged. So I think I'd start with a few fundamental thoughts and ideas that would help remove our blockages to self-expression. After that, I'd probably talk about time management and the things we discussed here, the other blockages of self-expression. After that, it would be like getting that first chapter down, and we'd be vomiting. Then it'd be the second draft, third draft, hater-proof. There's so many things that people do as distractions that create the writer's block, which is what's someone going to think? Is this good enough? Am I qualified to do this? Should I change that person's name or not? What about the legal things on this? What are the rules on this? Like, what should the title be? Even deciding what the title of your work is procrastination. Because you know yourself, like how much sweat and labor and thought process it is to do the title. Just get the whole book done. Or should I do a proposal? Like, I'm a big advocate of write your book first. And I told someone this now who has a amazing 6-figure deal, and they really said this partly because of this. They wanted to do a proposal, and I said, just finish the book first so you know what it is. Your proposal will be better, and you'll be able to sell it better because you know what it is. Again, plenty of exceptions to this, and most agents will disagree. All those self-doubting questions you have, put them in the work. Don't use them excuses not to work.
Yeah. One of the writer's block riffs that I have is that your best idea is like right in front of your face. And the reason I like this is I sort of point it right at the top of the nose. You can actually see your finger. And I think that a lot of times people think that they need to go look to other places for their idea. Oh, look there, look there, look there. But sometimes it's just here. And a lot of how I think about writing is by talking to other people, by, hey, having an experience that gives me a mirror onto what's right here, actually changing my perspective, then I can see it. And I find a lot of my writer's block is I'm not seeing the idea that was right in front of my face the entire time.
Yeah, and it's interesting because going back to what my syllabus is, the first exercise that helps people get rid of their limitations is that thing I have them write takes place entirely in their interior world and separate from their thoughts. It's to prove that you can not only write something that's interesting, but you can do it without any experiences, without any thoughts or original thoughts. And that's super freeing because I think like the key to not having writer's block and to writing is freedom.
My experience is that there is this fountain of creativity within each of us, kind of this stream of ideas that is always there unless you block it with something. And I think a lot of us unintentionally or unconsciously block that stream because it's like, oh, well, they're going to think I'm an idiot, or I need to make money, or I'm trying to build an audience on Instagram, whatever it is. It gets blocked with all this stuff. And then once it gets blocked, we're like, oh man, I don't have any ideas. It's like, well, you put your limitations on what's acceptable is so confined to this tiny little space that, like, yeah, you ran out of ideas. But if you remove those confines and draw like a much wider boundary of like what's an acceptable idea to you, then they'll start coming through again. And the crazy thing about ideas is that you can start working on it. This kind of comes back to like, what is creativity? You can start working on an idea that has nothing to do with your real work. And once you've worked on it for a few hours, you realize like, oh, actually it totally relates to my real work. And I could actually pull this in and like use this as a story or an example in a chapter or whatever it is. So it's that ability to just remove judgment and expectation, I think is, especially early in any process, is just, it's an important skill to hone and develop.
It's interesting. I used to have a lot of anxiety about writer's block, and now I have much less. I think it's because I've just experienced periods of like not being able to write and then like it restarting again. And like now that I know that's how things work, I feel much more at peace with it. I also feel like, like one thing that's interesting, I didn't think of this until you said it just now, but I think I said at the beginning, like I also work a job where I do kind of like copywriting type stuff. And when I started, a lot of people were like, oh, like, aren't you worried it'll take away time from writing? But I just thought now that like, I think this thing I've been feeling is that it actually helps me a lot because it takes away the time I would spend thinking about like, today I don't feel inspired. Let me sit around for 2 hours, like agonizing about how I don't feel inspired. Like now when I have something to write, I just write. And when I don't, I'm just like busy. So maybe I will say that for me, that's really helpful. I think just living life and writing when you can and making time for it, but also not agonizing is super helpful. Because I am remembering now that I used to have just these periods where I'd agonize over not being able to write. And that was really hard. And I don't do that anymore.
I love using ChatGPT to help me write something. Especially like as I've been trying to write this thing. If I get like stuck, it's a sort of like super thesaurus. If I just can't figure out how to phrase something, or I'm like struggling with something, or like just can't get something to flow. But it's definitely not like gonna replace coming up with the ideas anytime soon. It's an incredible tool for writers, but definitely not a writer.
Like a sparring partner.
Like a collaborator, like someone you can like give like a subtask to.
Yeah.
After I sold Scribe, got sold my ranch to my family, everything's good. I'm like, all right, I need to write. It's time for me to write it's time for me to write my next memoir. Everyone how did you go from Beer and Hell Tucker Max to this guy? It's a crazy story. There's a lot there. I want to write it. It's time to write it. I sat down to write it. I wasn't getting anything done. And I know all the tricks. I know all the techniques, literally all of them. I went through the entire bevy. One of the last ones at the bottom is a forced accountability, right? So where you make a public commitment or you do something with a group, that kind of forced accountability, right? Because it's just a high effort thing, right? And so it's at the bottom of my personal list of the tricks I use to get myself going if I feel stuck. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to teach people memoir, and I'm going to commit to them that I'm going to write my memoir with them. So that's what's very different, like with my group, is I'm not just their coach and mentor. I'm writing my memoir with them, and they get to see my rough drafts. Like not just like my finished stuff, which when it started off, I had, 10,000 words booked. I'm like, okay, I'll dole this out the first couple weeks. And so so I don't have a lot of pressure. I'm like, I'll be able to stay ahead of it. Didn't work that way, dude. I got behind, man. And so then what ended up happening, like by about the 3rd month, I had to start showing them my really raw, like vomit draft stuff that was just garbage, dumpster fire, which rough drafts are always have a level of rawness to them. But these were like my really, really rough stuff, right? That I hadn't even, like, I wasn't that embarrassed or ashamed because, they all love me. They're all like, we all work, we all know each other, once they join the group and stuff. So they were a great crew. But I was just like, oh, man, I can't believe I have to show this to people. Like, I wouldn't even show this to my wife. Like, it's just not ready, right? But it's what I have. It ended up being one of the best parts of the program. And now I've actually solidified some of those drafts and make it part of what people read when they onboard. Because I didn't, of course, as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, but I just didn't think about it ahead of time. So many of these writers think that, like the fancy published writers, like you or me or whoever, like we just shit out gold, right?
Trust me, that is not the case.
Of course not. But we tell them this, they don't believe us.
Yeah.
They don't believe us, dude. They look at my books and they read them and they see how polished they are. Or they read David Goggins or they read whatever. And they're like, this is so good. I could never do this. And anyone who did this could never be where I am.
Yep.
Even if they don't tell you that is their belief. And then they saw my and these are real, like I wasn't, like I didn't have anything else to show them.
Yep.
And I committed, I was going to, so I had to show them my shitty stuff. Bro, they were blown down.
Of course, yeah.
Like one of the dudes who's in England, I'll never forget, he goes, mate, this is right shit. Because this is shite. And I'm like, yeah, dude, I know. Like, did you really need? He goes, no, I'm not criticizing. He goes, I didn't believe you when you told me. I didn't believe you. And now I can see it. He was so energized and excited. He goes, oh, I can get where I'm going. Yeah. I can do it. I believe it now because what you just wrote looks like what I write.